Hi, I'm Mara Webster, co-founder and head of programming in Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled to be leading today's Q&A for Apple TV Plus's The Shrink Next Door. We are joined by cast members and executive producers Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd, as well as cast members Kathryn Hahn and Casey Wilson. And Will, I wanted to start by talking about a lot of the characteristics and traits in how you played Marty, because you've spoken yourself about how he, as an individual, has certain characteristics and traits that are naturally a little bit more heightened, and yet you still find the more grounded elements in your performance. And did you find that there was a balance that you were striving to strike within your performance to be able to lean into those more heightened aspects, but still always pull it back to the more grounded space of telling the story and him as a character?
Whoa. Whoa. Right out of the gate. Wow.
Whoa.
Coming in hot.
Ooh, coming in real hot.
That was so, yeah.
Well, both Paul and I, we did discuss the tone throughout this in the sense that, you know, if you were to, you know, visit and spend time with the real Marty, if I were to actually do a, you know, a very spot-on depiction of him, he might be described as someone who's very heightened. But that would have probably felt false to what we were doing. And so, yeah, we just kind of had to find that, what felt real. And that was the main objective, to just play it real, play it with honesty, and to let the context of the writing and the situations be what was either funny or sad, but to start from a very grounded place.
And for you, Paul, there's that really interesting moment when he's taken Marty out to play basketball, and then they've gone to see his ex-girlfriend, and they're outside, and he's like, I'm going to do something really unprofessional right now. I'm going to cross the line, and I'm going to give you a hug. But that's about the 10th thing that he's done already in the first session.
Yeah.
And what was that balance for you in looking at a lot of the tools and the skills that he has as a therapist, and a lot of the very genuine things that he's utilizing as a professional, and then the spaces where he's finding those spaces to really gradually cross the line and take it further and further, because it's not something where he comes in hot and heavy. It's very incremental in the way that we see it develop.
Yeah, well, this relationship, I mean, it spans nearly 30 years, and I think it had, you know, some of those manipulations and things do kind of take time. And I'm not so sure that they were initially part of a scheme or anything. I think Ike would consider his methods to be unorthodox, but that he really does want to help and thinks that he's helping. Those feelings are legit, that he's friendly and feels like I am professional. I really am doing the job. But then, yeah, over time, it starts getting a little sketchy.
And then Kathryn, looking at your character with Phyllis, you know, she's very much a guard dog by her own words, in the way that she's very protective over her brother. And we see the fact that she's able to really pull on this assertiveness that she's likely developed from childhood in having to step into that role a lot, even as the younger sibling. And yet at the same time, in those same moments, like when the guy comes and has the complaints about the curtains, we see the sensitivity and the real softness to her as well. And was it important to you that you really capture the essence of both of those, even within singular scenes and moments with her?
I mean, yes, of course, but I was just kind of following the North Star, which was the script by the amazing Georgia Pritchett, which was just like, you know, so it was all in there, those switches, those like, the all of it, the fierceness and the, like, you know, open-heartedness, like, and the, you know, my friend always says the phrase, like, he's an open-faced sandwich. And I feel like Marty's such an open-faced sandwich at the beginning of this series. Like, he's so vulnerable and he needs help so badly. Like, he really legit does. And so I feel like just following the signposts that are laid out for me that by Georgia and that amazing writer's room helps with those switch. I don't need to do anything but ride the ride and look into those eyeballs.
And then Casey, with your character, it's interesting because we do see moments where your character has a certain assertiveness and is pushing for things that she wants within her relationship, within her family, and yet Ike does still manage to kind of reel her back in and get her to give in a lot of times. You know, we see a little bit more of her coming out and really pushing for those things, like when she wants childcare and she's like, I'm going to use my own money. But there's a journey for her to get there. And so how did you want to create a character that had that assertiveness and yet sometimes still cowtailed, because she's being gaslit by him just as much as Marty is?
Yeah, I think because we didn't know as much about Ike's wife, Bonnie, so Georgia kind of wrote such kind of a beautiful character. It's a bit gray in terms of, I kind of thought of her as maybe Ike's first kind of first Mark in a way. And I think she thought he's like this god, but then when Marty enters the picture, she's able to sort of see like, wow, my husband, like when the veil comes off, he's not this guy that I thought he is. So I think I thought it was just interesting for someone who's so hopeful and so in love and thinks she's married, kind of so above her station, to then kind of be so fighting against the fact that it's actually he's not very nice to her, and so kind of finding that assertiveness, because it's 30 years time, and I think she wanted the marriage to go so well, but you know, a lot happens.
And for all of you, because that concept of tone came up, and it sounds like there were a lot of conversations amongst everybody throughout, and I think Georgia's scripts really beautifully capture this very unique tone in which a lot of the comedy is almost sitting with you after. You may not laugh at the singular beat of when something happens every single moment. Sometimes you do, but there's moments where you watch a scene and then a minute after you're kind of chuckling to yourself internally. And so were you thinking about the different ways in which you wanted to play to the comedy? Because it's not broad, but it's really coming from that place of vulnerability and emotion within all of these characters.
I don't know if we were consciously thinking about the moments as either comedic or not. I think we were just all executing what, you know, once again was on the page, and being true to the characters and the relationships, and knowing that we will, you know, kind of as actors find those moments that are gonna, we find the comedy there in just, you know, subtle articulations within our characters, but for the most part, I think we're just, it was just a chance to kind of be storytellers, and as in life, you know, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's sad, and that's kind of what this story is about.
Yeah. And Paul, I wanted to talk a little bit about the charisma that Ike has, because he's incredibly engaging in order to be able to pull people into his world. And yet at the same time, there are moments where that darkness that he tries to control kind of does seep out. The moment where he's talking to Marty about the tree and really kind of eviscerating him for his emotional connection to the tree and his family, because he's trying to separate him from people around him. And so how did you strike that balance of both a real charisma and a real charm that was a necessity for him as a character, but then thinking about the moments where that would seep out from him and then a little bit of a darker tone?
Well, you know, I mean, it's funny, when you're playing a part, I don't judge him, or I kind of feel protective of the guy in a way that I started to kind of unfold the more we would film. And I started thinking more about what is the relationship he had with his father, what causes people to do what they do. I was really drawn to this character, not because, I mean, it was definitely a different kind of part for me, but I would never think of him as like a bad guy or villainous. Instead, I really was drawn to this relationship that he and Marty have, and this kind of codependency, and that is, I think the friendship is real, and I think that Ike really does want to help. You know, there are some things that happen and that happened that you could say are hard to justify, or say this is really, really bad. But to try and understand why somebody does what they do that's the part that you really kind of want to explore. So it's not really about trying to, like, oh, this is going to be, you know, really a gripping, you know, ruthless scene. But it's like, why is he doing that? And you just try and balance it, and at the end create some kind of character that people might have a very strong feeling about, but can also somewhat empathize with, because you see just a human being that is damaged in their own way and dealing with their own kind of struggle.
And then Will, kind of talking about some of those internal struggles that Marty's having, it's interesting to see the way that it expresses in both an internalized way and an external way. There's the moment where he's falling to the ground, where he has trouble breathing. You know, we know that he has stomach issues. And so what was your journey of looking both at the scripts and also at the conversations that you had with Marty and really figuring out how you wanted that anxiety and internal insecurity to play out in an external way throughout the series?
Yeah, I mean, I think in listening to, not so much in my discussions with Marty did I kind of sit down and go, wow, you were really neurotic, weren't you? That was more like, tell me about this moment and tell me, but I think in listening to the podcast and hearing his articulation there of how he was feeling, but I kind of just, you kind of load it all into your data bank. And is it data bank or database?
I think it's data bank. Oh, maybe it's bank.
I think it's more database.
Maybe it's base.
I think in a way, they almost kind of both work.
Okay. Or we may never know.
We might never know.
I don't think we will ever know.
We are, if anybody would like to call in, though, and let us know.
We're taking.
The lines are open.
Please let us know.
We're here.
Yeah.
Callers are standing by.
I'm drowning with questions.
Anyway, you load it into the database or the data bank. We're never going to know.
It's unknowable.
It's unknowable, and we got to give up the thought that we're ever going to solve it.
Let's just let it go.
Please.
Yeah.
Guys, stop
For
trying
once.
to get us.
Because we never will.
For
The
once.
problem is everyone's trying to call.
I know.
So
But
Let's just please cut the lines.
anyway, I loaded it in somewhere, and then tried to.
they're getting busy signals. So many people.
So many people are calling up. Please,
Please.
operators are standing by. And then I just tried to kind of create my own interpretation of what it would feel like to me to kind of.
Data bank.
It's data bank.
I don't trust your sources.
Well, now I just got texted database. I don't know.
They're texting you?
Yeah, I'm getting texts too.
Wow.
Anyway, but
Anyway.
what felt genuine to me to kind of, as opposed to what I literally thought Marty was going through.
Yeah.
You're welcome for that answer.
Thank you. I've learned a lot about databases and data banks.
Yeah.
Jumping back to your character, Kathryn.
Yes.
I think,
Who am I? What do I want? That's what I always ask.
perfect, answered, done.
By the way,
She does it. She
No,
does.
I do do that. I do that.
you always scream out
yeah.
before. It's like speed and rolling, and then right before action.
Catherine, who am I? What do I want? Who am I? What do I want? And then you do a weird stretching pose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who am I? What do
I want?
Action.
Well, it feels like in watching the whole series that there's a really tall order in terms of the journey that your character goes on. In those first few episodes, you take her from a place of almost codependence in her relationship with her brother, in the closeness that they have with one another, to a
Yes.
point where she's completely cutting ties with him, and then jumping to spoilers for later in the season, she comes back at a place of forgiveness after not seeing him for 27 years, which is a huge leap to make within your character. But then again, even those first few episodes, you have so much journey to traverse through. And so how did you navigate finding all the different dynamics within that relationship?
Okay. I so appreciate that question. And it was, I'll tell you that it was hard I was definitely mourned when I said goodbye. Oh my gosh. When I had to say goodbye to Marty, when we had our final fight, was awful. It was hard to leave and then come back with all of that track. I went home to my family, had a couple months, and then to come back with knowing that all of you guys had been playing for that whole time, and have to drop back into seeing him after 30 years was tough, was really, really tough. And, but the thing that was helpful was that we had incredible writing. So I'm just gonna keep bringing it back to the writing.
Yeah.
So, and also just this amazing actor that I got to work with that I will be forever humbled by. Like, really what if I just really start crying?
No, don't.
Yeah, I might now. No, but it was beautiful to work with him. And so that to be able to, it really helped because I didn't know if I'd be able to find it coming back after all that time had passed in like life and hanging out with kids and da-da-da-da. But then we were able to just find it again. And was really, I'll hold that experience for always.
But it is literally incredible that the real Phyllis still had enough empathy
Yes.
to kind of go, oh my God, all right, let's start slowly, but I'll at least have a conversation.
Yes.
And
after all that time, to have like that window of like, okay, maybe. So that's a rare person.
yeah.
And Casey, with your character, did you view her as someone who ended up being incredibly isolated? Because one of the things that struck me is that we really don't see friendships and relationships with her as a character. The people that are around her are the people that Ike has surrounded himself by. And those are all, even in themselves, aside from Marty, very surface level relationships as well. And so did you look at her as someone who was gradually becoming more and more isolated from everybody around her as well?
I think so. You know, we were talking about that documentary, the Nexium kind of thing had kind of come out at the time. And I was kind of thinking of her as someone where her husband is kind of has a hold over her. And we were kind of joking, there's never any of Bonnie's family or friends at any of the parties. And it was just kind of interesting. She was kind of siloed off, I think. But I think also she really genuinely loved her husband and thought he was so great. But then when he kind of turns away, it's very cold, I think. And then he was spending so much time with Marty, which it was both, I think Bonnie was sort of jealous of Marty, but also kind of empathetic towards what he was going through because she was kind of alone in a way in her marriage.
Yeah.
And one of the scenes I wanted to ask the two of you about, which was touching on a little bit before, is that scene where Ike is talking to him about the tree and his family relationship, and then the moment where we see Marty outside chopping it down, and then we see Ike watching him with a sense of real satisfaction and accomplishment, because I thought that the dynamic within that scene was a real turning point within their relationship. That's a real moment where we're seeing the lengths to which he's able to carry this dynamic too, and was just interested in the journey of how a lot of the emotional beats of that scene came together for you both.
Oh, that was one of the ones I really felt was particularly harsh. And we talked about it. I mean, there was a build to that.
And that was. I mean, we've talked about how lucky we feel to get to not only work together again, but to know each other as well as we do, and it really gave it. It allowed us to trust each other, and that was that day where Ike is really dressing Marty down to analyzing what is the symbolism of this, in his view, stupid tree, and it was so. Ike was so mean to Marty that day, but I didn't have to act that day. I felt this small, and but. In an effort to win him over, there was no other choice. I had to chop that tree down. Because I didn't want to, I couldn't lose him because he's all I have at that point.
And a lot of that is, I think about Ike himself, not about Marty. And, he's, it's a pretty complex and layered scene. And you're right in that it does, it is a fine line. Because, how do you come back from that? And what is the tone? And, much like Casey's saying, I mean, that was all written. That was all kind of beautifully written out by the writers. And yeah, it was. It was hard to shoot.
Yeah,
I mean, it felt really bad. And I remember seeing Will's face, and it was just heartbreaking. I felt that, throughout the shooting. There was Will was just so kind of vulnerable and open. And it was really, I think, fun for us because the other things that we've worked on together in the past have not been that. And so to kind of get to explore that kind of material and this kind of tone and these kinds of characters was, it was cool to go through it with somebody that, like Will says, I certainly trust and admire and like to work with.
And one of the other shifts that's interesting to watch relationship dynamic-wise is between Ike and Bonnie when they become parents, because I think it pulls out different things within them. That's actually the moment where we see Bonnie start to stand up for herself and ask for things that she needs a little bit more. And then with Ike, it feels like that actually calls into play more of his vulnerabilities and insecurities about the way that he grew up, the things that his parents couldn't afford, because he now in turn can't afford the same things for his children. And so for both of you, how did that really act as a tipping point and a changing point for your characters?
Well, I think Georgia wrote it so beautifully. I remember when I auditioned with that scene, just how she captured kind of new motherhood and just how absolutely kind of torn down you are, at least I was. And then Bonnie has twins, and then Ike is kind of not even kind of giving her the respect to offer to, have her have any help. And I just was so infuriated myself, kind of, as a person, but I think that is a big tipping point between them where it was just so unbelievable. And it's kind of like, oh, this is not the charming guy that I see you present yourself to everyone else.
But at the same time, I think if we were to ask, we're doing a story of this podcast, I think it'd be different perspectives and probably not identifying himself as doing something wrong per se, or I think that everyone is just kind of trying to get through life,
survival mode,
and do what's right and do what's best for their family, for themselves, and over time, by slight degrees, that can really go off the rails, and you almost don't notice. And I think that's certainly happened over the course of 30 years here. It's happened over the course of a marriage, because I think that this couple actually does really love each other.
Yeah.
I think Ike loves Bonnie. I think that Ike loves Marty. I think, but the relationships get pretty sticky and tough to kind of manage.
That's why we have an 8-episode series out of it. Yeah. And then lastly, for each of you, I was just interested in what you found to be the most challenging aspect creatively in working on this project. And I'm going to start with you, Casey, and then come this way.
Oh, gosh. I would say creatively just playing the gray area of, was Bonnie kind of complicit in this, or is she just really, not wanting to see certain things was tricky. And then, to be quite honest, I was so excited to work with all of you guys, and we'd work together, but to work with Will and Paul, I was intimidated is the wrong word because you're both so warm, but I was nervous, and it was challenging, but you guys were both then so terrible to me, so it was hard, but no.
Yeah, it kind of manifested itself.
Yeah. It was about halfway through, it got really ugly.
It got very dark, but I think I was able to teach them a lot about acting.
And
Not that much.
Personhood.
Not much?
Not that much. Some.
Little.
Some things.
Yeah.
I like the gestures part. Just being
just like business.
Yeah, always a business.
Always have business.
And it's an actor's secret.
Cover your entrance. When you walk in, you're doing something.
Yep.
Always.
Yeah. So that felt good to teach them a little something, and we're still working together, so.
Perfect. And for you, Kathryn?
I think the challenge for me from the beginning was trying to, in my deepest part of my soul, find that light of forgiveness for after 30 years. And really, because, as Georgia has written this piece, there are no real villains or nothing is, cut and dry. There's accountability everywhere, and there's decisions everywhere. And so to actually find that truly for Phyllis, this Phyllis was really a challenge, and really felt real when we came to it.
And Paul?
Well, I think that this is a pretty complex character, and one that if you looked at kind of the overarching kind of theme, you'd say well, this is a bad person or a bad guy and kind of villainous. But to try and find the things within this character that are human and not. I mean, I tried to find that same gray area to not judge him, and also know that it's a real person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to try and, look like him and sound like him, and then still create this character that I have empathy for, that I and want to try and show these different kinds of sides. It was a bit of a juggling act. I mean, it was a challenge to take on, and I like doing it, but it was.
I found it pretty easy. It's the whole thing.
I
didn't really. Yeah, I just show up on time,
Yeah.
circle my lines, good to go.
You didn't even have to ask, who am I? What am I doing?
No. And I also want to go on record as saying a lot of my fellow cast members said a lot of nice things about Georgia. I found her work to be subpar at best. There's an American term called phoning it in, and I really feel like she phoned it in on this one. And I have the guts to say it,
Dude, you know what? Hats off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a while just to get to the real stuff.
Yeah.
We needed to.
And I think we finally
We found it.
Get through the chaff.
yeah.
The chaff? The chaff. Not the chaff.
I think we separated the wheat.
Chaff. Separate the wheat from the chaff.
Well, I think basically what we're doing is we're dealing with a lot of chafed wheat right now.
Well, I think that your performances are really astounding, and I think there's such delicate tones and balances that you've all managed to strike in your performances. Congratulations on such a fantastic series, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Q&A for Apple TV Plus's The Shrink Next Door.